Good morning. I hope everyone is doing great today. My name is Gary Gann, and I'm a procurement counselor at Tribal Government Institute Apex Accelerator, located in Norman, Oklahoma. We are excited about today's webinar because not only is Project Spectrum going to discuss your cybersecurity journey, we also have 14 different Apex Accelerators from around the country as co-sponsors. We have a special guest with us today, Mr. Kareem Sykes from Project Spectrum, as well as Mark Chisholm from Project Spectrum. Mr. Sykes currently serves as the Industry and Engagement Program Manager for Project Spectrum, a U.S. Department of Defense recognized cybersecurity awareness initiative that offers resources, training, and tools toward increasing cybersecurity awareness and hygiene for small businesses. Mr. Sykes provides strategic leadership for a dynamic team of cybersecurity and outreach professionals whose collective aim centers around providing the educational resources and tools small businesses and institutions need to develop, implement, and maintain cybersecurity compliance. He oversees and directs the daily execution of multiple projects within the large-scale program and assures that the initiative adheres to government regulatory guidance. Mr. Sykes also manages contractual requirements to ensure that Project Spectrum meets the cost, schedule, and performance goals required by the Department of Defense Office of Small Business Programs, OSBP. Feel free to place your questions in the questions panel and we will get to them at the end of the presentation. And Mr. Sykes, we are happy to have you with us here today and we are excited to get started.
Very good. Good morning, Gary, and good morning to everyone in attendance. Very excited to be here. Pardon me if my voice sounds a little hoarse. I seem to be coming down with something, as I think is the case with many of us these days as we get used to some of the new weather changes in the season. But again, very excited to be here. I wanted to start by, again, first thanking you all at the TGI Apex Accelerator. Again, we are a strategic partner with all of the 97 Apex Accelerators around the country. As part of the initiative for cybersecurity provisioning for small business in concert with the DoD Office of Small Business Programs. And so much of what you'll hear me talk about today is wholly consistent with the small business strategy that was set forth by the DoD earlier this year, in January, in fact. And so much of what our goals are centered around extend to talking about that small business outreach and specifically helping those companies that would otherwise be extremely challenged to become prepared for some of the impending guidelines that are coming down by the DoD as it relates, for example, specifically to CMMC or the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification, which is predicated, as we all know, off of the National Institutes of Standards and Technology, so NIST standards is where CMMC derives. And so with that being said, I'm going to see, Gary, you might have to give me access to be able to share my screen here. Looks like I'm not able to do it as yet. Okay, very good. All right, and hopefully you all can see my screen here.
We can see it.
Excellent, excellent, excellent. On that regard, I'm going to jump right in and talk a little bit about kind of, where we are with the current cyber threat landscape. And this is, I think, critical. It lends to everything that'll follow subsequent. And that is really to codify that, what these three bullets really break down in short order is that, we want to dispel this myth, right, that there are small businesses that are, not susceptible because they're so small, right? There's a popular way of thinking among many small businesses, particularly the micro smalls, where they think that because they're so small that they're not as attractive as, for example, the big six, the Boeings, the GDITs, the Northrop Grummans, and so forth. the bigger defense contractors within the defense industrial base, right? In fact, nothing could be further from the truth. We know that there are particular threat vectors that are aimed specifically at those smaller businesses because it is all well too known that in fact, there's certain challenges, both in terms of financial constraints as well as resource constraints, which ultimately extend to whether or not a company has put in place the proper things to make sure that their infrastructure is one in which that's resilient and in tandem with the guidelines that would ultimately protect the types of data that would otherwise be susceptible to would-be attackers. And so in that regard, again, we know that some 70% of small businesses are comprising the DIB. We also know that 25% of those DoD prime contractors are awarded to small businesses. More than 40% of all cyber attacks are happening, again, with small and medium-sized businesses, right? So with that being said, why is it that small businesses are targeted? Well, these are just a few reasons, as you can see on the screen here, but I'll have to tell you that for as applicable and relevant as all of these reasons are, there are far more reasons why small businesses are targeted. But these are just a few of the sort of key reasons that we see based on our research and based on our vigilance in and around the cyber community for small business, that there's that connection with the larger defense contractors, right? There's this idea that, focusing on production and, again, meeting deadlines, again, leaves cybersecurity as this sort of extraneous activity that would be nice to have rather than something that is absolutely critical. We know that there's intellectual property concerns. We also know that there's issues with regard to access to sensitive government information. We'll talk a little bit about, foreign ownership, control, and influence as well. That factors in here also. But ultimately, at the very last one here to the right is that there's this idea that limited cybersecurity resources leads to funding concerns, which ultimately lead to companies being ill prepared to handle cyber attacks. And that's really where I think a lot of the emphasis that the private spectrum is really targeting is really lending towards. And so as we talk about kind of the role of the federal government, whether it's in the design, acquisition, development, production, or distribution areas within the procurement supply chain, what we know is that adversaries are looking to strike at every phase, right? They're looking to exploit a lack of a company's ability to be able to ensure that they have that their role in the supply chain is secure. Again, compliance with government mandates and requirements is going to be critical. And this specifically, we talk about those government mandates and requirements. It really lends to CMMC 2.0 and the self-assessments. Those self-assessments, as you've no doubt heard me talk about in the past, are absolutely critical in identifying not only where a company stands in the context of the appertaining security controls relative to their intended level of compliance, whether it's level 1, level 2, or level 3 under the CMMC 2.0 model. We know that, for example, at level 1, self-attestation suffices. So you can do a self-assessment, and if that self-assessment meets the litmus test, then you would be able to leverage that self-assessment, uploading it into the supplier performance risk system, which we'll talk about as well. And that will suffice for having met that CMMC level 1 compliance, assuming that score is in tandem. At level 2, there's really a distinction of controlled unclassified information, both at the prioritized acquisition level as well as the non-prioritized acquisition level, and split A and B respectively here. We know that if it's a non-prioritized acquisition, that self-assessments will suffice. That is, that you can look at the self-assessment, take the self-assessment on projectspectrum.io, and that will suffice if in fact it is deemed that is the level of information that's being handled, transmitted, and stored is in fact deemed to be a non-prioritized acquisition. This, by the way, is something that the DoD will designate either in the RFP or at some point in the process as they're issuing the solicitations that are coming out for the respective contracts that companies would be pursuing. We look at split B. We know that in this case, if it's a prioritized acquisition handling controlled and classified information, that in fact a third-party assessor would need to, companies would need to meet with a certified third-party assessor organization, or otherwise known as a C3PAO, again, certified third-party assessment organization. In that case, they would need to meet with them on an every 3-year or triennial basis. And again, in either case, the preparation that Project Spectrum is provisioning, and this is the takeaway here with the self-assessments, is that we've made sure that our self-assessments from a scoring methodology perspective, really from being able to understand what the questions are asking you, right? Even if you're a novice to having kind of dealt with anything in the realm of CMMC, that in fact, we have those explainer videos on the self-assessments that kind of give you extra information about those controls relative to the different levels of compliance that one would be seeking. And so that's another invaluable benefit there. But again, writ large, we are DoD supported through the Office of Small Business Programs. Obviously, our emphasis, as Gary mentioned, is to be able to provide this cost-effective platform of cybersecurity information, resources, and tools. And it bears worth mentioning here that all of these resources, tools, and training that Project Spectrum is provisioning on the site currently is at no cost to the user. And I'll say that again. So there's absolutely no cost to be able to leverage those invaluable pieces that we've added to our portal, projectspectrum.il. That is where one would go to register to be able to access the myriad of resources as it relates to cybersecurity. So again, our mission, really the centrality of what we're doing is really focused on this idea of readiness, resilience, and compliance with those small and medium-sized companies, specifically in the defense industrial base, but really this applies to any company that is looking to make sure that their infrastructure and the way in which they're handling information is in fact secure, and that the proper measures are being put in place to make it very, very difficult, if at all possible, for attackers to compromise their data, their information, and so forth. And so when we talk about innovation, cybersecurity, and compliance, we know that, again, that these resources are available at no cost, as you see bolded there. But we also know that improving cybersecurity is going to help us protect, again, as I said, small business data, their revenue, their reputation, as well as that intellectual property that many of these small businesses are developing and have developed for the DoD. We know that increased cybersecurity throughout the supply chain is going to have a reverberating impact beyond just the defense industrial based supply chain, but to national security writ large, right? And so that's a key critical component. I want to talk a little bit about the Project Spectrum service offerings kind of at a glance here. So what are we provisioning? Well, we have a team of specialized cyber advisors that are at the ready to be engaged. These are full-time equivalents. These are people that are steeped in the technology, professionals that have engaged either at in industry or government work. They not only have that sort of technical acumen that one would find, for example, of someone who is maybe working in a security operations center, or someone who is familiar with vulnerability and penetration testing and all these sorts of things, right? But they also have to go with that an understanding of the DFARS, an understanding of the Code of Federal Regulations, an understanding of compliance in terms of cybersecurity as it relates specifically to the defense industrial base. And that's invaluable. That coalescence of both is invaluable. So we talk about self-assessments again for both CMMC as well as NIST 800-171 cybersecurity protocols. That's another piece that we're critically involved with. The strategic partnerships and the mentor protege program, cybersecurity pilot. That is another program that Project Spectrum engages with. We'll talk more about that. The community outreach and engagement. That's a critical piece of what we're doing. And again, also called out within the small business strategy for DoD that again was published earlier this year in section, or rather in objective 3 specifically. Again, this idea of reaching out more to small businesses within the supply chain and letting them know specifically what cybersecurity resource provisioning is available. And so as we talk about cybersecurity tool development, yet another key and critical offering that Project Spectrum brings to bear. You'll hear me talk a little bit more about that in depth later, but Now I want to talk a little bit about some of our special collaborations and partnerships that I think have really lent to a lot of what is most germane to many of the businesses that are coming into to Project Spectrum's environment at projectspectrum.io, and that is our work with small businesses vis-a-vis the military services. So whether it's the Department of the Air Force, the Army, the Marine Corps, the Navy, we have worked tirelessly to make sure that, for example, with regard to the Mentor Protege program, the cybersecurity pilot within DoD's Mentor Protege program that we facilitate, that we're working with those services, making sure that we're touching with their Office of Small Business Programs respectively for those individual services. And then again, getting out to many of the events. So whether it's Sea Air Space, whether it's Navy Gold Coast, AUSA, we're making sure that we're staying connected to the services and in tandem with what they're doing and making sure they understand the resources that are available to their constituencies as well. And so as we talk about some of the federal agencies, we know that the Defense Contract Management Agency sort of oversees the, if you will, scoring methodology for example, the self-assessments as it relates to CMMC. And so that scoring methodology we've taken, we've understood, and we've incorporated many of the practices that are necessary to make sure that when companies take our self-assessments, that in fact those scores are legitimate representations of where those companies are relative to the controls specific to their individual and or intended level of compliance. Again, level 1, 2, or 3. The Defense Counterintelligence and Security Agency, again, always looking at what we can glean from the Center for Development of Security Excellence, which is the directorate within DC SA that handles a lot of the training that goes broad brush across the defense industrial base, certainly, but even into many other federal agencies. And so a lot of different training paradigms and perspectives are gleaned from that, some of those partnerships there. The Defense Logistics Agency, of course, with the Apex Accelerators having once been under that umbrella and now transitioned over to the Office of Small Business Programs, we're certainly leveraging synergies to build upon those 60 or more Apex Accelerators that we've already worked with out of the 97 around the country. And so events precisely like this, where we're talking to many of our partners with the Apex Accelerator program to, again, educate both the Apex Accelerator program managers and counselors, but as well those small businesses that they're bringing in at various events. Again, key and critical partnership there. And then as we talk about the National Security Agency, we've worked intently and tirelessly with the Cyber Collaboration Center, specifically with the chief there, Morgan Adamski. She's been on many of our cyber circuit events, or rather she's been on a cyber circuit event that we've had in the past. But we've also talked through many of the things that are helping small businesses, such as protective DNS, free resources, again, that can help companies protect their data and make sure that they're that much less likely to be attacked, and if so, that they know how to handle those attacks if in fact they occur. There's 3 other strategic partnerships for which we have landing pages on the projectspectrum.io site. You'll notice the DoD Mentor Protege program, which again, the emphasis there is cybersecurity, hygiene, and training. We also have the Manufacturing Extension Partnership, and that is again meant to be sort of a self-directed platform for those manufacturers to really come into our environment, really look at, for example, case scenarios, if you will, that we have on our page. That does require a separate registration. So there's the initial registration to get onto projectspectrum.io. And then there is another registration with more specific information about your company relative to manufacturing the MEP program. And so, but once you've done that second registration for the MEP component of the site, you would then have access to all of the entirety of the site, or the entirety of that page, which includes, again, those scenarios that really walk a company through how it is that they would be able to sort of understand the resources that are that Project Spectrum's provisioning, the self-assessments, many of the trainings, the online trainings, which we'll talk about, and so forth. And so you'll be able to see how that sort of coalesces along a particular cyber compliance journey. and that's invaluable. We know that operational technology is huge and critical to the MEP and to those manufacturers around the country, specifically within the DIB. We talk about the SBA. Obviously, there's no shortage of information and synergies that are gleaned between many of the changing guidelines as we're looking at, as they're coming down the pike with the SBA. We want to make sure that we're leveraging our platform to bring in those folks that are connected with the SBA already, and those that may not be, that they can leverage our site to get to the SBA and many of the germane things that are happening, both from a policy perspective, as well as many different outreach events that are happening for SBA. And so as we talk about, again, these self-assessments, it does bear worth kind of going in a little more granular, understanding that CMMC level 1 is focused really on federal contract information only, that in fact these are basic safeguarding requirements that are specified in 48 of the Code of Federal Regulations, 52.204-21, the FAR clause. And of course, CMMC level 2 is going to be talking about CUI, or controlled and classified information, consistent with those 110 security controls specified in NIST SP 800-171 Rev 2. We know that NIST 800-171 is really where we're talking about, again, security requirements that are applicable to non-federal systems that organizations are processing, storing, and or transmitting controlled and classified information. And so when we talk about kind of the expert cyber advisory services that Project Spectrum is laying out there, one of the things that we understand is that whether it's compliance assistance, whether it's gap analysis, whether it's helping companies understand what goes into a system security plan, so looking at that from both an assessment as well as a development perspective, again, the same for the plan of action and milestones, as well as looking at the security enclave design and architecture. Project Spectrum's cyber advisors are at the ready to be able to engage and help companies understand what this is. This can seem like, a quagmire of information. And so what better to have than a cyber advisor with whom you could engage with to help you understand some of these things at no cost to you, which is just hugely invaluable. We talk about some of the research and advisory services that those cyber advisors are engaged with, right? So everything from fielding technical inquiries through our outreach at projectspectrum.io mailbox, which again, I'll post up here as we get further along here in the slides. But the MPP cyber pilot, again, walking those companies through hand in glove over that 2-year period with which that cybersecurity pilot is designed for. Tool research and development. There's a ton of efforts that are happening in the background, some of which we're going to be talking about here today, that will be coming to fruition over the next few fiscal years here. Education and training, content creation. So those cyber advisors are also steeped in and working with our instructional system designers to bring content to bear so that we can help, again, continue to make these available on our site so that small businesses can engage them and help towards their compliance training requirements. We talk about communications and outreach. Again, whether it's blogs, webinars, or video content, those cyber advisors are helping to craft that material and get that information out there to you in concert with our esteemed communications team. And so we talk about some of the best-in-class cybersecurity training and resources. Again, really this idea of developing robust cybersecurity training, making sure that we're doing that in a way that's consistent with, for example, our layout of full scope training courses, our controlled and classified information for contractors course, plans of action and milestones. Again, helping companies understand what this content is, what it comprises, and how best that they can begin to start leveraging it to position their companies for success along their cyber compliance journey. We also do and provide these training resources through a proprietary learning management system that we've developed. We have 26 micro courses that are being developed. We have many of those available right now on the site. Again, really focusing on, if you will, bite-sized, smaller chunks than as opposed to those full scope training courses, but really focusing on those core CMMC controls. And so ultimately what we'd like to have happen, and one of the goals that I've charged our team with is to look at ways in which we can sort of look at ways we can have information that's gleaned from the self-assessments, for example. If, for example, there are particular controls that a company may be lacking in, how do we cross-reference that with exact core micro courses that are applicable to those controls with which those companies need help with? And so we're really looking at a way to really automate that as we move forward. But again, we do have those at the ready. And again, our cyber advisors are happy to help you with that crosswalk. Do-it-yourself tools enabling companies to conduct self-assessments, again, against NIST and CMMC standards. It's hugely invaluable there. We talk about the customized user dashboard. This is a really, really great way in which to see progressions of effort within each type of readiness check or self-assessment, but it also allows companies to be able to see what they've done relative to other levels. So for example, maybe they've started out with level 1, they've incorporated some of the trainings that were gleaned from the self-assessment, looking at different areas of opportunity there. And subsequent to that, maybe they've taken another self-assessment later. They're able to see that progression of effort. But as well, let's say that they've started with level 1 and have since identified, for example, other contract initiatives after having met level 1 that are going to require, for example, level 2 compliance. Well, they can see where they would stack within those different levels, different self-assessments that we offer on the site, and have that in a composite dashboard with which to review and leverage as a way in which to begin to move forward and improve upon whatever successes they've already had. And so it's a great way to see that in one customized dashboard. We also have the useful tools page, which again really speaks to a number of third-party tool providers, whether it be SaaS solutions or software as a service solutions, or government regulatory compliance writ large, different solutions that are there that we believe are going to be beneficial to small businesses. What we've done is we've simply opened it up to where we evaluate what companies are providing relative to what we think our cyber advisors are thinking, what's going to be beneficial to our small business constituency. And if in fact we believe it's something that's going to be of value, we've listed it here on our site. We've not only listed it though, but we've gone through and done the research that small businesses would otherwise have to do on their own. And that is, we've understood what costs associated with it. As I mentioned, Project Spectrum's resources itself on the site are available at no cost to the end user. As it relates to this particular piece, where we're looking at third-party tools that we're listing on our site that we believe are going to be helpful, they do in many cases have costs associated with them. But again, we give you an idea of what that looks like. We tell you what those companies purport to do, and then you can categorize them, again, depending on the type of tool you're looking for, if in fact that's known. And if not, again, our cyber advisors can help you with that. So again, hugely valuable there. Again, a big time saver, again, saves companies countless hours that they would otherwise have to spend digging in and looking at each individual site to try to glean what these tools are about. And so as we talk about kind of the need for foreign ownership, control, and influence, education, and protection, we know that in the 2023 NDAA, Section 875 specifically, talks about the need to establish a program that, again, is going to be able to demonstrate commercial due diligence tools, techniques, and processes. And it's this idea really to get at what is it that we can be doing that's going to help us help small businesses identify these attempts by malicious foreign actors that are seeking to gain undue access to or foreign ownership, control, and influence over the business. And that's really what we're looking at in our foreign ownership, control, and influence course that we offer on Project Spectrum. You'll see this recurring theme in the third bullet here, where we talk about this idea of being able to identify, evaluate the impact, and then, of course, begin to reduce those associated risks that are identified throughout that process. We know that some 50% of espionage within, for example, the U.S. manufacturing sector alone is due to foreign ownership, control, and influence. And so, again, no shortage of impetus to begin to put in measures of understanding what is foreign ownership, control, and influence. How does it relate to a small business? There is this idea that foreign investment is in many cases encouraged, but again, there have to be right and left delimiters as to what that level of ownership affords a company, and when that begins to step beyond a boundary, for example, of acceptability. and risk, for example, to the supply chain. We talk about the cybersecurity pilot program. I mentioned that earlier. Again, that 2-year program where we're working with those companies hand in glove on, if you will, a one-on-one basis, looking at their hygiene, looking at incident reporting, for example, with regard to cybersecurity. Again, we know that companies are successful in that pilot program if they can demonstrate an increased awareness of and compliance with both NIST 800-171 as well as 172. 172, I'll just point out, being more germane at the CMMC level 3 pursuits. We know that if they're able to demonstrate readiness for cybersecurity maturity model certification, again, this idea that Project Spectrum is coming in this preparatory capacity, making it so that the preparation costs are none, right? Because companies are able to then leverage the resources that we have on the site so that if in fact they are pursuing, for example, a level of compliance that would in fact require them to meet with a C3PAO or again, certified third-party assessor organization, that in fact, that they're not having to pay what would otherwise be exorbitant cost on the preparatory piece. That we know that there's going to be a cost associated with the actual certification process. But again, helping them to defer and or defray cost, or not defer, but defray cost that would otherwise be shouldered by those small businesses whom we know are already challenged. We talk about maintaining the health and security of users, devices, networks, and data. Again, sharing best practices among the DoD small business community. And then as it relates to cybersecurity tool development, we're talking about everything from deception technology to creating a secure cloud environment, which, by the way, we're actually, as an aside here, we're actually in the process of seeking participation for small businesses in our secure cloud pilot program. And that's where we're going to be leveraging a platform that we've created to test out companies' ability to securely store, transmit, and process controlled and classified information through a virtual desktop environment. And so we're doing that pilot program now. If in fact you are interested in that, or if you know of small businesses that may be interested, please have them send an email to outreach@projectspectrum.io and just include in the subject line interest in secure cloud pilot. And again, there'll be an official communication to anyone who's registered with Project Spectrum. We send out blast emails as we're doing various programs like this or pilots or updates otherwise. And so we'll be sending out an official communication very soon, but just to give you a sneak peek and allow companies to get in on that if they're interested. We are seeking about 50 companies to engage in that pilot program, I believe over a 30 or 60-day period. And so more information to come on that. Some of the other technologies that we're engaged with, visual network mapping, again, being able to assess vulnerabilities, essentially using mapping and replication processes for manufacturing networks and processes to be able to understand what's happening there and see what ways in which we can deter attacks that are happening in the supply chain. Polymorphic encryption, again, another piece where we're looking at how is it that we can protect data in its various positions. So whether it's at rest, whether it's in motion, and it all points throughout its motion, right? We know that attackers are looking to exploit vulnerabilities and exploit data ultimately for those adversarial purposes. And so with that, we want to look at how can we deploy certain algorithms and various technologies to be able to protect that data throughout its transit. Project Spectrum differentiators. So how are we different from the many other service providers that are out there in the compliance space? Well, we have, again, that world-class team of cyber advisors from the small business cybersecurity realm. And again, they're at the ready at absolutely no cost to the user. Expert cybersecurity practitioners, again, to be able to meet with someone to talk about, for example, your self-assessment or to talk about your individual company and or the types of contracts that you're going to be engaging in, and what therefore then should you be looking at, what should you be considering. To be able to get that type of advisement at no cost is just unheard of as far as I'm concerned, as far as what our research and knowledge has led us to believe. Well, the fact that we're sponsored and endorsed by the Department of Defense Office of Small Business Programs is, of course, hugely beneficial. It does give us the ability to touch in various spheres, again, in and around the military services, various federal agencies to be able to get the word out there as to what these resources are and how they can help and how they've already helped thousands of companies. We talk about the self-paced tools and training and resources, again, those courses, online courses, again, meeting, whether you're the novice or the expert, meeting companies where they are, being able to be malleable in our approach, and understanding that all companies on some level are going to be able to take away something from Project Spectrum. We do have, again, some rudimentary content, intentionally so. Again, we know that many companies that are coming into this are very new and are therefore, best met at that novice level. And so we do have content, I think, across both of those spectrums that speak to the efficacy of what we're doing insofar as helping those small businesses prepare for compliance requirements. And so, again, just to wrap up here, innovation, cybersecurity, and compliance. We're doing many things, whether it's tool development, training, provisioning, those third-party resources that you've seen, all are just a glimpse of what Project Spectrum offers. We also have a policy corner on the site. We're putting out blogs at any given time that are very helpful around, again, different cybersecurity initiatives and things that are happening in the community for vigilance and awareness for our constituency. So there's that education awareness piece, but then there's also that training and compliance piece as well. We know that if we're able to help companies protect their data, their revenue, their reputation, intellectual property, then we're on the right track insofar as what we're doing from a cybersecurity perspective. We know that, again, this is really about our national security writ large. We focus and talk a lot about, again, small businesses within the defense industrial base, but we understand that that has reverberating impact across the industrial base writ large and our national security. And so with that, we're excited about what we're able to do, getting out to events, touching with key components, partnering with the Apex Accelerators is all key and critical pieces about what we're doing. And we encourage and promote small businesses to register at projectspectrum.io today if you have not already. And you guys as Apex counselors and program managers, please help us to get that word out to all the small businesses with whom you are no doubt having such a critical impact with. How can you reach us? How can you connect with us? Again, projectspectrum.io. Again, it's a free account, takes about 2 minutes to register. Those self-assessments are going to help you establish that baseline. Accessing that comprehensive suite of tools and training resources on the site are going to be key and critical. You can get us on social media at LinkedIn, Twitter, and YouTube, at our channel on YouTube. And then also, again, the main outreach mailbox, outreach at projectspectrum.io, is a mailbox that's triaged many different ways. So, for example, if you have site issues or site concerns with, for example, a training course or something that you saw on the site, you can send those as well to this email address. It'll get funneled to the appropriate support box. If it is something with regard to, again, the pilot, the Secure Cloud Pilot, you can send that to us with that subject line of interested in Secure Cloud Pilot. And then the appropriate team will be reaching out to you very shortly. And again, always checking the calendar of Project Spectrum to look at what events that we're engaged in and what events that we're tracking on that we think are going to be helpful for small businesses to participate, whether it's webinars, presentations that we're doing ourselves, or that some of our partners are doing in and around the DIB. So please take a look at all that and reach out to us as you have questions. And speaking of questions, I can take a few here. Anything more granular, please reach out to us, again, at that outreach at projectspectrum.io, and where you can talk directly to our cyber advisement team. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mr. Sykes, for delivering an excellent and informative presentation today on this important topic. We appreciate you sharing. Absolutely. We appreciate you sharing how Project Spectrum can assist small businesses with this cybersecurity journey. We have a few questions from our audience, and if anybody has any additional questions, be sure to put them in the questions box. So let's get started. Would you recommend doing cybersecurity even if not involved in CUI? The asker is with a medical claims clearinghouse.
Yeah, that's a great question, and the answer is absolutely. Again, one of the things, and this gives me an opportunity to nail home something that I probably should have mentioned, which is that, much of what we're provisioning in the way of cybersecurity resource provisioning is not relegated to just this idea of checking a box for compliance or compliance that's coming down the line, right? With regard to CMMC, we know that we're on the, if you will, precipice of hopefully codification of the interim rule that the DoD CIO is looking at as we speak. And again, is in that sort of deliberative process. The DoD Chief Information Office does obviously manage that CMMC program. And so as such, we don't have much information as yet on that. But one of the things that we want to sort of lay out there and emphasize is this idea of companies not waiting. For example, even in the medical industry, there's invaluable information on projectspectrum.io that is going to be able to help you position your company both from building your infrastructure, again, to protect the ways in which you're handling information, even if not CUI. Maybe it's federal contract information, or maybe it isn't any of that information, but it's just this idea that you want to have and make sure that you're handling the way you're processing, handling, and storing information, which is going to be germane to any type of information that you're handling. That you're doing that in a way that's going to be hugely beneficial, and in a way that DoD, obviously, by putting out the CMMC 2.0 guidelines, even though that is again relevant to FCI and CUI, the idea is that this keeping your infrastructure lock, stock, and barrel is going to be germane and relevant to any company, regardless of what industry you are in.
Excellent. Are the tools listed for free, vetted, and clear from vulnerabilities and ready for use?
So again, what Project Spectrum does is we take a look at those tools. We do have our own vetting process to make sure that those tools are doing what they purport. And so we do encourage, and we certainly want to make sure that you as a small business are certainly doing your due diligence. What we wanted to do with that third-party tool review page is take at least some of the legwork out of the way for you, so that you could at least see if these companies are even worth or investigating further into. We certainly would encourage every small business to do their due diligence as it relates to what those companies are offering, and again, specifically as it relates to what it is that you're seeking to glean from those companies. We certainly want to encourage that you do that due diligence for sure.
Okay, where may we find a simple list of what is required for level 1 and level 2 compliance?
Yes, so again, another great question. Again, we have trainings on our site that will break that down in no uncertain terms. So again, once you've registered on projectspectrum.io, you can begin to look at the training courses. Although what I would say first is make sure that you know what level of compliance you're going to be seeking, and if you don't, leverage our resources, our cyber advisors, to help you with that. One of the things we understand that small businesses are short on is time, so we want to make sure that you're spending your time in a way that is extremely productive, and in a way that's targeted towards what it is that you should be focusing on. And so I would say do that, and then look at the self-assessments that are on the site again at projectspectrum.io, which you would have available, you would have access to rather upon registration.
Excellent. Do you have any recommendations for a pen testing tool that we can use?
I don't offhand, but again, these are questions that our cyber advisement team can help you with. I would also say take a look at our third-party tool review page. I think we have more than 100 tools that we've done reviews for. So please take a look at that. I'm sure you can find information that will be beneficial there. And if not, again, working with the cyber advisors directly, they would certainly have some insights on those types of inquiries.
Okay, great. Are you looking to partner with MSP to assist companies with compliance?
So we are sort of self-contained, if you will, in the sense that we do have what we believe is sufficient to be able to help those companies with their compliance preparations. That said, there's always going to be a need for partnerships down the road. I don't have any insights on what's available as of this moment. I think we're pretty lock, stock, and barrel with what we're doing there. But again, certainly feel free to reach out to us, and we can certainly entertain and hear what we're always looking to partner where it makes sense for us. But again, I think as of right now, we're pretty well contained in that we have what we believe is going to be sufficient, to really speak to the base of folks that we're looking to talk to. Again, those small and medium-sized companies, getting them prepared, getting them ready for what's coming down the pike. But again, I would be remiss to tell you that we're going to be able to handle every type of inquiry or every type of aspect that's going to come in. The reality is there's going to be a need for strategic partnerships as we get further down the road, and so we're always open to that where it makes sense.
Okay, great. Did you say we should upload the CMMC Level 1 scoping assessment to SPURS?
No, not the scoping assessment. In fact, the only thing that's required in terms of uploading your self-assessment score, consistent with the DFARS that exists now, is your actual score. So when you go to upload, so the supplier performance risk system is housed within what's called the procurement integrated enterprise environment, which again is a repository that is a repository, that supply performance risk systems is a repository that the DoD has for those scores to be uploaded. You do not have to upload any actual documents. The scoping assessments are things that are going to help you, along with the self-assessment, kind of understand the realm of what's relevant and germane to you for those respective levels of compliance. Currently, the scoping assessments for level 1 and 2 are available. The DoD has not released the scoping assessment for level 3 as yet, as far as we're aware, and so we're tracking that so that when that becomes available, we'll also be pointing to that as well. But in terms of what needs to be uploaded to the supply performance risk system, it is simply the score from the self-assessment and some other basic information as well.
Okay, perfect. How close are the NIST 800-171 requirements to the CMMC requirements?
Yeah, so this is a great question, and I think it's a great point or a great opportunity to point out a very important distinction, and that is that NIST, or the National Institute of Standards and Technologies, are standards, if you will, sort of writ large, right? They're not requirements, if you will. The CMMC is a derivative of NIST, but it goes a step in the direction of making sure, if you will, sort of a compliance checklist. There's a compliance checklist for those respective levels that companies are pursuing that the DoD has defined. So, for example, those 17 controls under CMMC level 1, those are actual compliance requirements that companies have to actually meet. Whereas the National Institute of Standards and Technology is saying, here are some best practices, here are some standards by which companies should be aware of insofar as their handling of various types of information. The CMMC comes down and says, here's the compliance arm. So based on those standards that NIST has set forth, here's the compliance arm, these 17 controls for level 1, these 110 security controls for level 2, respectively. So it's a good point of distinction there. But I'm sorry, to the last part, you asked how close they are. So this is a question that's going to be, I think, more germane and more helpful for one of our cyber advisors to answer. But what I can tell you is that the CMMC is derived from the NIST standard. So there isn't going to be anything in the CMMC standard, or in the CMMC compliance requirements that is going to be contradictory to that which NIST publishes. But again, for the closeness of it, that's a bit subjective of a term. So what I would say is definitely reach out to one of our cyber advisors to get a little more granular and define exactly what you mean. And they can certainly help you with a tailored answer there.
Perfect. I think that was explained really well.
Thank you.
If I am only a subcontractor on DoD contracts, does my organization still need to be CMMC certified?
Again, another fantastic question. I'm glad you asked that. So one of the things that we find in when DoD published the CMMC 2.0 guidelines, and even before then, we know that there were going to be subcontractor flow down, what they call flow down clauses. And that is that if in fact a prime contractor is designated to meet a requisite level of compliance, that then also appertains to those subcontractors. And again, we've heard some of the frustration with this, right? We understand, for example, a janitorial services company that is saying, hey, I'm a subcontractor to a prime, but I'm not doing anything like what they're doing, right? I'm not engaged in the level of activity they're engaged in. So why then do I have to meet the requirements appertaining? Well, part of it is you may not think that your particular purview and insofar as the type of information you're handling calls for a certain level of compliance. But for example, in the case of that janitorial services company, if they have access to a certain aspect of the building, even if they're not there to get on a computer or to exchange information, if they have access to that area even, right? And they could potentially come across that information, right? Then that would sort of explain why it is that they would also have to meet those requisite levels of compliance that the prime contractor has to meet, even though their purview for that type of information is very different. And so that just gives you just one example, but I've had folks reach out to me that are they have companies where they're making the product that they make might be like a cog in this huge wheel, right? Just maybe a nut and bolt, literally, right? And they're saying, well, I'm just making this one screw. Why do I have to, meet the requisite level of compliance that, the company was handling the facilitation of that entire cog that bolt applies to? Again, these are the flow down clauses that have been brought down, and these are what the guidelines are. And so we want to make sure that we're communicating accurately what those subcontractors or those sub-tier contractors will invariably have to meet in terms of compliance levels. And there's good reasoning for it, certainly, although I understand it can be a bit frustrating.
Okay. Since CMMC will only be required for the Department of Defense contracts, do you think other non-DoD federal government agencies will adopt something similar?
The short answer is, I think the answer is yes. I mean, obviously only time and policy and the sort of proliferation of CMMC as it's, of course, after it's first implemented, will really tell the story. But already we've seen inklings, right? Already we've seen inklings of these questions being asked around the federal government writ large, even outside of the DIB. And so, I think, it would be a hard case to make, although there are certainly different components. I get it in terms of procurement activity. It would be a hard case to make that if it's good enough for the DoD, that it would not be good enough for the whole of federal government. Having said that, there are nuances. There are a lot of differences in terms of how things are procured. For example, at DHS, I know that they have their own version of assessments that they're going to be doing from a cyber perspective, and they have a different criteria they're going to be doing it based on. And there's a number of other federal agencies that are, again, looking at this question of, does it make sense to apply something like this across the whole of federal government? And I think those conversations are absolutely being had, and I think we'll learn a lot more over the coming months and years as we get closer to codification of the interim rule here for CMMC, for DoD.
Okay, perfect. If a weakness is found during my organization's assessment, what is the time window to correct the vulnerability so we can pass the assessment, or is this unknown at this time?
So it's yet another key point here. So if you recall back in November of 21, when the CMMC 2.0 guidance was handed down, one of the things they talked about, for example, was plans of action and milestones, right? One of the things that would be different, a lot different than under the CMMC 1.0 area that existed previous to November of 21. And so one of the things they said was that there would be a 180-day period. They were suggesting a 180-day period with which those areas that were identified on, for example, a plan of action milestones would have to be remediated, right? That they would be strictly time-bound that contracting officers would, quote, use normal remedies to address a DIB contractor's failure to meet defined timelines, quote, unquote. That in fact, there would be limited use, right? That they would not allow POAMs for the highest weighted requirements. And that in fact, they were going to establish what's called a minimum score requirement to support certification with POAMs. So it's this idea that there's a lot more teeth around POAMs. But again, to the question, they were targeting 180 days, from the point at which a company identified an area that they were not yet meeting on, for example, a plan of action milestones.
Okay, great. Do you know of any starter templates for creating a system security plan?
So this is again a great question. One of the things that's hugely advantageous of working with us at Project Spectrum is, again, you're going to be able to work with those cyber advisors. They're certainly going to be aware of all the various types of templates that will be helpful. Do I know of anyone specifically? Well, that's a bit of there's a bit of, again, subjectivity there, right? So it's going to be unique in many cases to the type of information a company is going to be handling, the industry that company is in. There's a whole myriad of factors that are going to be relative to that. But I can tell you that in working with that cyber advisement team, they would certainly be able to help point you in the right direction. And at minimum, they're going to, between that and our System Security Plan Fundamentals course parts 1 and 2, respectively, is going to educate you about the fundamentals of what it is that any system security plan should encompass and comprise. And I think that's going to be really where you want to focus is, okay, what are the things that I should be capturing fundamentally across the board, and then getting with a cyber advisor to be able to talk through some of those more granular details about, again, for example, your type of industry, what types of information you might be handling. That'll determine what that template is going to look like.
Okay, great. We've had a lot of interest in the slides for today. Can you make them available so we can distribute them to today's audience?
Yes, I'll have our Mark Chisholm, who's on the line from our comms team, PDF that document and send that out as well to you all to distribute amongst your team as well.
Okay, wonderful. We'll go ahead and do that. Well, I'm not seeing any additional questions, so I want to thank you, Mr. Sykes, and Project Spectrum again for joining us today. This is a very important topic, and I hope everyone that wants to do business with DoD and any other government agency takes this seriously and gets started on this cybersecurity journey as soon as possible. And for those of you on the call, be sure to reach out to your Apex Accelerator and Project Spectrum if you think of any additional questions. Have a great remainder of the day. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Take care.
You too.